You're listening to Big World Network.
Bloodshot Buck, Episode 3, written by W.H. Wood and Mitch K. Allan. Read by Willow Wood. Military hospitals had a double-edged sheen about them. Ava always noticed this. Tinted lights whispered through the office doors and around the front desk as if saying, "We have all the super tech your body could want." It smelt of progress and minimal sickness. This hospital was no different. Terracotta rubber floors, mellow xanthic paint, mint green tinted windows. Sterility overload, Ava used to say. NENI-LOHI led the way across the lobby floor and into the elevator. She seemed quieter than usual, like her true consciousness was buried beneath a vapid sense of duty. She twisted and tugged at her fingers. "Did ya do much today?" Ava asked. "Yes," NENI whispered. "Very tired now." She smiled, but not with her eyes. "Are you nervous?" "Like fish in a tank." That deepened NENI's smile. "The things you say." "I know. I'm wasted in the Marines." The elevator doors opened. Down the hall and into a lab. 3 medical staff greeted Ava and instructed her to change into a sleeveless jumpsuit. It was papery to the touch and fit her like a dead cat in a tissue box. "You'll be here for a couple of weeks," said one of the doctors. They walked her back down the hall and into the settling ward. Ava's heart began to race. 8 beds lined the ward. Data streams snaked down from the ceiling and into each bedside DNA monitor. She was about to endure her cells physically realign, and all she could think about was fish. Tiny coral reef fish swimming out into deep water. "The sanguine marine has arrived!" cried James from the far end of the ward. He was already in bed with needles poking into his arms. Doctors muttered and fussed around him as they set up his monitor connections. "Lovin' the new battle armor," he continued. Ava struck a fleeting pose, instantly embarrassed by herself, and tossed her long hair as if someone had punched her in the nose. "Thank you, Sterling. I call it paper no weight." "It's paper no something," he said, convulsing with a laugh. "Private Buck, if you please," said her doctor, holding back the bed covers. Taking deep breaths, Ava slipped beneath the sheets and watched the orange lights pulse across the ceiling. With every needle and injection pushed into her system, a little part of her wanted to scream and laugh and kick and dance. Michael came in halfway through, but neither James nor Ava had the stomach to greet him after all the injections. To NENI's credit, she didn't stop talking. "You'll have more DNA installments throughout the week," she said. "If you want anything, just let me know." I could die. "Do you have a kudos link? I listened to 5 audiobooks when I was littling." Ava's head grew hot and her skin prickled, growing sharper by the minute. "It's about a Katha who falls in unrequited love with a human. Just a cut, actually." Sweat dripped down Ava's cheeks. She felt like she was contracting every flu known to humankind, and despite her efforts, she trembled at this persistent thought. Just think of fish. Yes! He couldn't stop grinning. The others were going to be so jealous it made every other insufferable detail worth it. The nurse behind the counter eyed his delivery as if it contained rotten eggs and oozed a sulphurous miasma, but she had a habit of looking at him like that, and would his ID badge just clear system checks already? She had damning eyes, and the box was heavy. Driston Potts, she said, as if every syllable of his name inflicted personal insult. Could you at least pretend you know my name? He replied. He flexed his boots against the terracotta rubber floor, knowing it would piss her off. She glared at him with her stupidly cute, shrew-like face. What's in the box? Not my business, is it? Driston tapped the red handprint on the white packaging. The synth symbol. Put it in the scanner. No can do. Strict orders, not to. I strictly contradict this. It's true. Let me just, He fished a signed document out of his pocket and handed it over. The way she tongued her cheek as she read, biting down on a rude retort, only deepened his smirk. You've not been to the synth wards, have you? Driston asked, rubbing it in. With a drivelling glance at him, she reset the information on her monitor and swiped his badge. You have 40 minutes, she said, handing it back. What? I hope you don't get lost. Oh, come on, Clara. 39 minutes. As usual, he had no witty reply, and with an angry sigh, Driston scuffled into the elevator. It didn't matter. He was in a synth-only zone. Him! Driston had planned to take a snap of himself in one of the toilets as later proof. Not on the toilet, obviously, but with such limited time he'd have to think of some other devious plan. Tingles, shivers, buzzing nerves. He had to prove it somehow. God, he was so excited he could vomit. The doors pinged open. Driston all but split-leaped into the corridor beyond. Maybe, if he dropped the box off as quickly as possible, he could sneak around and pretend to be lost. Yes, unadulterated genius. Any smarter and he'd be a light bulb. Step 1. Defeat the hospital corridors and deliver his charge. Paying attention to every sign, Driston wove his way into the synth wards. From floor 15 and up, the hospital was dedicated to caring for synths and the just. It was the only location in the quarter that normal folk, like himself, had any chance of running into one of them. After all, a colony of this size couldn't run on Marines alone. But their lives were separate. The Blood Wizards were advised to live in barracks, while Tom Thumb Civilian was strongly advised to stay so far away that he'd have more luck asking a Cathar to open its carapace than he would entering a synth-only zone. A no zone. He eventually found the right room, a tiny broom cupboard of an office. Sadly, it looked like every other workstation in the history of desks, pencil pots, files and touchscreens. He tried to act natural as the doctor took the box from him, but Driston almost dropped it, his long fingers sweating. You all right? She asked. Yeah, I'm just, Could you sign here, please? Mission complete. Cargo delivered. 20 minutes left. Time to abort like a gazelle. Willfully ignoring the signs this time, Driston set off into the unknown with his spirits soaring. He deferred his head to anyone he passed and peered into open doorways. At one point, Driston waltzed right into an open ward, the room lined with occupied beds and wheezing, chatting patients. Synths. All of them. He couldn't make himself look, his heart beat so fast. He didn't belong here. They'd know it. Not daring to sneak a picture of the clipboards that hung on the end of each bed, Driston raced on, taking deep breaths. That's when he caught sight of a justicate in one of the ward junctions. The man plodded towards him with his eyes on a datapad. All right, time to go. Rank too high, thanks, but no thanks. Driston shot down the nearest path and all but ran out of sight. Maybe this wasn't such a good idea. If Driston was caught, his lost lamb sob story might not actually work in his favour, and wouldn't Clara just love that? There was still time. His ID card could still activate the elevator, if he ran. Another justicate appeared, and Driston thought he was about to either die of panic or asphyxiation. Without checking the signs on the wall, Driston activated the nearest door and slipped inside. It hissed shut before anyone seemed to notice. He let out a deep, shuddering breath. But then he noticed the silence all around him. Turning, Dristan saw he was in a private ward with 3 occupied beds. Judging by the DNA monitors and the peacefulness of the place, he knew this was probably the settling ward or the demolition recovery bay. He tried not to implode. "Hey." Dristan almost choked on his own hysterics. He let out a strangled squeak. A woman was squinting at him, almost as if focusing her gaze was a chore. She trembled, her skin pale and splotchy. Was she dying? Her black hair framed her face in a tangled, sweaty mess. "What spooked you?" she asked. Did he throw himself out the window? Did he surrender now, while he still had a chance? And did she just ask if he was okay? "Nothing," he said. "Sorry to bother you." No. She trembled harder, but forced a smile. "Bother makes a change. See much life out of them two?" she asked, waving her hand to the other unmoving patients. Dristan forced a polite laugh, not seeing the funny side. That's when it hit him. He was chatting to a synth. She thought he was meant to be here. What more could he ask for? Maybe she wouldn't mind if he took a snap of something. He tried to relax and abandoned all hope of reaching the elevator before his ID access expired. He'd had worse ideas, like snapping himself in the toilet. Neni tried to tell herself that eyes were supposed to look like that. They were always wet and glistening and jelly-like. Weeks of changing into a dribbly blood figure hadn't given her alien eyeballs. They were brown and boring and plain, like always. Yes, definitely her face. Definitely don't think about those veteran justicates. The ones with ears like melted wax, who made moist, throaty noises when they breathed. Just keep on not thinking about that. What if one day she just turned into a gooey puddle and they couldn't put her back together again and there he was at the door. Thank God, a distraction. Neni stopped poking her face and glaring into the bathroom mirror and raced to the other end of the apartment. She threw the door open with an exaggerated, "Hello! Hello! Look how stable and happy I am! Yes, just call me Justice Trifle!" As always, Arkadash seemed to fill the doorway with his broad shoulders and wide chest. He took a step back at her false cheer, as though he had gone into the wrong room. The wrinkles in his dark skin deepened as he squinted at her.
"I'm picking you up for lunch,"
he rumbled. Justice Joyful vanished, and then he realized she didn't really want to talk to anyone, let alone get up and go. "Lunch," she repeated, looking at Arkadash's shoulder.
"Yes, lunch. You see, us mere mortals have this cultural thing where we stuff food in our faces. Once upon a time, Neni, we used to do that together. We called it Wednesday afternoon."
"Ark," Neni said, trying to shake off the image of gooey puddle Justice Prout and not have a nervous breakdown in front of her best friend. "I'm sorry. It's just—"
No, I understand."
Arkadash held up his hand.
"The ranks of the just sustain themselves on pride and haughtiness alone. Our weak human curry isn't tempting any more. At least I assume that's the only logical reason for you to blow off our lunch date for 5 weeks in a row."
Torn between stammering excuses and closing the door in his face, Neni surprised herself with an angry sigh of, "Oh, you're a jerk." But of course, it was Ark, so he dropped his fake solemnity for a cheeky grin.
"It's been 10 years, and I'm nothing if not consistent."
More like persistent, Neni thought. Arkadash had a way of hovering, rocking back and forth from foot to foot that made her want to agree to anything just so he would stop doing it. "I'm sorry," she said again. "I've not been feeling very well."
"Because you're not eating lunch."
Neni felt her mouth twitch. Smug shit.
"Come on,"
Arkadash said, hand on her elbow.
"We can gossip all about your new student, although I had hoped to have met him by now."
Her. Nenni said, wondering what EVA BUCK could have possibly done to deserve meeting this idiot. She let him drag her over the threshold, making tiny, tiny steps, as though she hadn't already given in.
"See? I didn't even know that," he said, sounding wounded.
All right. Lunch. You're paying.
Oh, surely the great Justice Prout can lend me a few.
I said you're paying, Captain. How long have you been in here? Tristan asked, clinging to the end of her bed. Beats me. I haven't kept track of the days for a long time. She smiled ruefully, chasing away some of the shadows of her sickness. You an intern? The perfect ruse. Yes, he said, then realized she might ask for medical assistance. Well, no, not really. She puffed out a shallow laugh. What? I clean floors. Well, no. I'm a cook. I cook food. No wonder the soup tastes like mop water. It doesn't. Working with freeze-dried imports weren't exactly gourmet, he knew that, but the soup was good. She laughed again until it turned into a hacking, wheezing cough. Tristan spotted a glass of water on her bedside table and dashed closer, holding it out. She trembled so much he had to help guide it to her lips. Thanks, she whispered. Anytime. What's your name? Buck. I'm not a soldier, you know. Tristan never did understand why soldiers completely abandoned the use of their first name, or at least it seemed that way. The girl licked her lips, assessing him. I'm Ava, she said. Nice name. I'm Tristan. I'm not really supposed to be here. I gathered. Ava shut her eyes, looking content, and Tristan flushed with excitement. Why are you here? He asked. I'm settling, aren't I? Yes, right, of course. I thought you might be the female demolition criminal, but they haven't even been sentenced yet, so I don't know why I... Demolition? She opened her blurry eyes. Stop. What criminals? You haven't heard the news? Ava raised her eyebrows, and Tristan kicked the floor, wishing it would kick him back. Oh, of course not, he said. Sorry. Sit down then. Educate me. Sit where? The ceiling? There was no bedside chair that he could see. She patted the sheets, and Tristan caught her meaning. He perched on the edge of her mattress, watching the images swirl on her bedside monitors. A couple of weeks ago, 2 synths were caught fighting in the practice building. Apparently the walls were covered in blood, and the woman almost ripped off the other guy's arm. Really? Yeah, they proper tried to kill each other, right in front of a new recruit. Sirens went off, drones were sent out, the whole deal. Can you imagine seeing that on your first day? A justice had to tackle the woman to the floor. She was rabid, and then the guy started firing blood bullets. So then the justice... That didn't happen. Ava interrupted, her eyes alight with energy. How do you know? I was the new recruit. Tristan's mouth fell open, and he regarded her in a new light. The others would never believe this, no matter what he snapped. This was amazing. This was the best, stupid idea he'd ever had, but oh, Jesus Christ, was he going to be in so much trouble now. He wasn't just talking to a synth, but the incapacitated witness to the most serious crime of the year. Nenni stopped them with a wave of her hand. Ava said, She never had to touch anyone. She's way better than that. You mean the justice? Yeah, NENI-LOHI. So what's demolition? Worse than the death penalty, if you ask me. That hooked her. They remove as much Catharian DNA from you as possible, but reversing the process is tons worse than mutating you. Almost everyone who goes through demolition comes out a vegetable. Her eyes widened, gasping a little, and Tristan nodded. He could no longer meet her gaze. Not for the first time, he imagined leaving the quarter, but knew his chances of ever seeing Earth were slim. Life here was so strict, so small. What was it like living without zones? And why would this woman agree to abandon it forever? How's my face? Arkadash looked up from his murky curry, fork in midair.
I'm sorry.
Neni glanced around the mostly empty canteen, trying to ignore the occasional squeak of chair legs. My face? Does it look normal? Did I put it back together wrong?
Your face is fine, Arkadash said. But for all his gruff tone, he leant over to check. Your nose is wonky, but that's no different.
Neni put a hand up to her nose anyway, wiggling it. Are you sure?
Well, excuse me if I don't make a habit of examining your cheekbones, Neni, but you look fine to me.
Neni's fingers left her face, but she still didn't feel convinced.
I mean,
Arkadash continued,
if you start growing tentacles, let me know, but...
I really don't know why I ask you anything anymore. Neni snapped over the top of him. She even tried to put some heat in it, but Arkadash just hummed and smiled peacefully.
Because I'm charming, and you feel sorry for me in my old age.
Neni clicked her tongue. Hey, you're right. Is that a grey hair or 20? Arkadash quickly ruffled a hand through his tight curls, then just as quickly pretended he hadn't.
I wish I was only 20.
They slurped more curry in silence, before Neni heard herself mumbling through a mouthful of rice. I hate it, Ark.
What?
This justicut thing. She waved her fork to punctuate her sentence, feeling pathetic. I don't think I'm cut out for it.
Neni, you're great. The way everyone talks, you were already a super synth before I got here.
She started pushing food around her plate, collecting up the dribbles of sauce. Not really, but...
Yes, really. You'll be fine. It's tough, but they wouldn't have put you in the program if you couldn't do it.
He was just so earnest, and he believed in her, like best friends were supposed to. It made Neni want to throw a tantrum. She wanted to just tip the table over into his lap and say it wasn't like the vids, it wasn't glamorous at all, and she didn't want to get dribbly ears or huge scales along her thighs or any of that. But NENI-LOHI did not throw tantrums. She mumbled something into her plate.
What was that?
Arkadash asked. The bodies. 2 fine eyebrows rose on his crinkly forehead. When we go into the blood form, Neni said, the original body just shrivels up like a prune. We've lived here all these years, and I've never seen a dried justicut corpse, or an incinerator, or... What did they do with NENI-LOHI Mark 1? Where do they all go?
Pies,
Arkadash said immediately. Arkadash Chelik, you are the worst best friend in the universe.
Music by Kevin MacLeod.
You're listening to BigWorldNetwork.